My literature review takes a look at the educational theory of constructivism and ways that it can inform the design and implementation of online courses. My own interest in constructivism as a broad philosophical concept stems from my undergrad and previous graduate studies in anthropology and art history. In this paper, I spend some time reviewing the history of constructivism and its evolution from an artistic and aesthetic principle developed way back in the 1900s to its emergence today as one of the dominant learning theories, which is just one of its many iterations. I recently transitioned from being a classroom teacher to working for an educational travel company as a curriculum developer and online course designer. Our courses are asynchronous, and although we provide constant feedback to all of our students, we do not get the opportunity to interact face to face. This is one of the reasons why I wanted to look at studies that review adaptive and dynamic technologies that can help keep students engaged and creating meaningful experiences in the absence of live mediation.
Studies for this literature review look at ways in which adaptive and dynamic technologies can keep students firmly placed within what is called the zone of proximal development, or the ZPD. They also look at the benefits of collaboration in online settings and the use of intelligent tutoring systems, also known as ITS, as an adaptive feature of online courses. Finally, my literature review ends with a special focus on adaptive and dynamic technologies as they relate specifically to language acquisition. My sources for this literature review all came from JSTOR and the Educational Resource Information Center, or ERIC. All of the studies included were published in English between the years 2000 and 2018. One of the most fundamental tenets of constructivist learning theory, as put into practice, is its emphasis on collaboration and the social construction of knowledge. The objective of this literature review is to highlight specific tools and case studies that will accomplish three goals. The first is to establish the theoretical framework of applying constructivist principles in e-learning design and to look at some historical examples of adaptive and dynamic technologies as used in online settings. The second is to demonstrate specific adaptive and dynamic technologies that have proven effective at keeping learners engaged within the zone of proximal development. And the third section of this review focuses primarily on language and existing technologies that can specifically be adapted to the process of language acquisition. The theoretical framework that I used for this literature review is the zone of proximal development, or the ZPD, which I mentioned earlier. This is a concept that was developed by the Soviet psychologist Lev Vygotsky in the 1920s. In his seminal work, The Mind and Society, Vygotsky defined the ZPD as the distance between the actual development level, as determined by independent problem solving, and the level of potential development as determined through problem solving under adult guidance, or in collaboration with a more capable peer. In other words, the upper reaches of the ZPD are the area in which a learner can fulfill their highest potential with mediation, while the lower boundary is that in which the learner can achieve a given task or skill totally unaided. The primary goal here is to keep the learner firmly placed within this zone, marked on one end by the student being bored due to lack of stimulation and challenge, and on the other hand, discouraged due to inability to complete the task and insufficient guidance. At its heart, the ZPD provides the framework for what we call today scaffolding. In e-learning and online learning environments, the question becomes one of how do we keep learners engaged within their ZPD without live personal mediation. In the classroom, instructors can assess a student's engagement by reading their behavior, their body language, and their live response, not to mention verbal feedback and cues. However, in an online asynchronous setting, this is much more difficult, as real-time assessment and intervention is not always possible. The authors Murray and Arroyo attempt to define a unique adaptation of Vygotsky's zone of proximal development that takes into consideration the nature and limits of intelligent tutoring systems. The authors here note the very nebulous nature of the ZPD as a measurable tool and its ability to be clearly defined. So, they seek to, in their words, operationalize the definition of ZPD so that it can be applied consistently across all ITS design. The desired outcome, according to the authors, is a state in which the student is neither bored nor too frustrated, and they explore options for an ITS program to utilize scaffolding in a way that keeps learners situated firmly within this ideal zone. Here on the slide, you can see some standard sets that the authors have used to quantify the ZPD. The numbers within the quotation marks signify the number of hints that a student needs in order to answer a specific set of mathematical questions. The findings here are intended to guide the design and implementation of ITS and online instruction that seeks to maximize both effectiveness and efficiency of learning. With studies that show it is indeed possible to measure and quantify the zone of proximal development, it then becomes possible to analyze and accurately assess the effectiveness of collaborative and mediation tools in e-learning contexts. One of the best methods to keep students engaged within their ZPD in an online setting is through the use of collaborative technologies such as discussion boards, Google Hangouts, and in the case of the study by Kleinesser and Hong, online literacy circles. In their study, Kleinesser and Hong analyzed the effectiveness of online literacy circles through the framework of three unique interactional patterns that represent three distinct psychological tendencies. These are behavioristic, social interdependence, and constructivist. The behaviorist tendency refers to things like required due dates, minimum requirements for discussion posts. In short, these are the discrete actions that trigger a sense of reward and punishment. Social interdependence refers to the creation of shared goals, shared spaces, and shared identities among participants. And the social constructivist tendency builds upon all of this by allowing learners to co-construct knowledge and, quote, bridge the gap between what they do not yet know, but may be able to realize with the assistance of peers or being informed by their interactions with others. The figures presented here compare and contrast the standard behaviorist model of interaction, which is seen in the first figure, in which learners respond to discrete actions in a limited scope with the dynamic, constructive model, seen in the second figure, whereupon interactivity is much more interspersed throughout the process, and learners receive constant and varied feedback based upon questions and lines of inquiry that are self-constructed. This bridging the gap that I mentioned previously is what the author of another study, Lydia Mbati of the University of South Africa, defines as cognitive dissonance, which she includes as one of her 4 constructivist criterion. Dr. Mbati seeks to understand how online media can facilitate learning using constructivist methods and applications of observational learning, specifically by looking at the effectiveness of discussion boards in online settings. In her study, Dr. Mbati defines 4 constructivist criterion that she uses to analyze the effectiveness of the discussion boards and the way that they're applied in online courses. These 4 constructivist criterion are the elicitation of prior knowledge, the activation of cognitive dissonance, or, as we've seen earlier, can be summed up as an aha moment in which students make the connections that they weren't able to previously, unaided and without the assistance of their knowledgeable peers or instructors. Number 3 is the application of knowledge, and number 4 is the reflection upon this knowledge that they have now gained and synthesized. In the next part of my literature review, I look at some specific applications and technologies. One of the most interesting studies that I looked at addressed the premise that science education for young learners too often de-emphasizes complexity because it is often perceived as, quote, developmentally inappropriate. According to the authors, by designing science activities for young children according to principles of the zone of proximal development and activity theory, educators can successfully teach complex systems to young learners and will find that they are far more capable of understanding and grasping complex topics than previously thought. To demonstrate this claim, the authors look at the benefits of a simulation software called BeeSign, which teaches young children in preschool about how honeybees collect nectar. The authors found that with the right kind of feedback and interactivity, students in the study overwhelmingly demonstrated positive growth in that they shifted from having misguided and simplistic notions on the complexity of hives to understanding its emergent properties. As an avid user of Twitter and former teacher of English as a second language, I was particularly intrigued by this study, which looks at and analyzes the effectiveness of using Twitter as a tool for language acquisition. The setting for this project was a fast-paced Italian language course at the University of Southampton in the UK, in which first-year learners were expected to achieve a B1 level by the end of their first year. The main features of this project were, number one, the implementation of a class Twitter group in which all students participated, with especially created accounts, and number two, a quote, Twitter champ, who served as the advanced peer tutor. This is in line with Lev Vygotsky's theory of the more knowledgeable other, which is essentially an advanced peer. Students participated in group chats outside of structured classroom time by tweeting at each other in Italian and the instructor. The MKO, as well as the instructor, would respond to mistakes in real time. In the second iteration, voice recognition was implemented by utilizing the built-in features of the mobile Twitter app, which allowed students the opportunity to use spoken language and not only work on their pronunciation, but also gauge their overall fluency and progress. This feature also served as a form of real-time, immediate feedback. The results of this project were overwhelmingly positive, with students reporting high levels of satisfaction and high use outside the classroom, beyond any classroom requirements. Although constructivism has become a mainstream and commonly accepted theory in curriculum design and implementation, there are specific challenges that designers and educators must consider when applying constructivist ideals in online settings. Traditionally, e-learning has been quite formulaic and based upon outdated behavioristic theories in which the learner is a passive recipient that can be guided step by step towards a fixed desired outcome. E-learning has, by and large, failed to keep pace with the current trends and advancements in learning theory, in part because of limitations and challenges of translating classroom-based instruction into online environments.
Unfortunately, many of these limitations still exist, and as the case studies reviewed here highlight, motivation and mediation when there's not a more knowledgeable other or instructor involved is one of the biggest obstacles that e-learning curriculum designers must consider. Early examples of intelligent tutoring systems are not readily available and were tailored to fit specific needs or simply to test a hypothesis, not necessarily to implement on a wide-scale practical basis. As e-learning and online communication in general have become more widespread and common, popular software applications have proven useful tools to facilitate the transmission of knowledge and the collaboration in online educational settings. Many of these tools, such as Twitter and discussion boards, are mainstream and widely available. What is important now is for educators to have the knowledge and awareness of how to best leverage the potential of these technologies and apply them in their online curriculum.